Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jodi Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
You're a privacy consultant?
I'm a what?
You said privacy.
I'm combining new words now.
Okay, very well. Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback, helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, and media, professional services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there is greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com.
Are you buckled up for today's episode?
I knew you were going to say that.
Well,
you're so excited.
Yes, well.
Try not to fly out of
here. Oh, well, that's a good pun. I'll have to tell your brother you did that well. Well, anyway, we're excited because today we're going to the drone zone. And today we have with us Dawn Zoldi, who is a Colonel, United States Air Force, retired, a licensed attorney, and founder and chief executive officer of P3 Tech Consulting, connecting people who have a passion for advanced tech platforms with the plans, programs, policies, and information they need to succeed. Dawn is the recipient of the 2022 Air Awards People's Choice, industry impactor, and one of the top women in aerospace and aviation to follow on LinkedIn 2022. Dawn, good morning in Colorado.
Hello and good morning.
Favorite topic and a favorite city.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's great to have you on the show today, and you have a very eclectic background. And so we always like to start out and ask our guests, how did your career evolve to your present role?
Wow. Well, let's start at the beginning. I was born a baby. No, just kidding. No, my time in the Air Force, I got into uncrewed aircraft, law and policy, really when I was more senior. I was working at what they call Air Combat Command, and that's the functional director for the large drones, the Predators, Reapers, and they're in charge of the organizing, training, and equipping of the military forces on those aircraft. And so basically I helped craft the Air Force and Department of Defense's policy for domestic use of those aircraft because, they're always frequently deployed downrange, right? And when I was there around 2012, Iraq was at least theoretically shutting down. Those birds were coming home. The pilots were not used to flying in the national airspace system. They were used to flying overseas in conflict. And so those rules are completely different. And that kind of started my journey and got me super interested in this area of the law. And around the same time, so many things were happening domestically and nationally. States were, legislating on, putting drone laws on their books. And Congress was talking about all these different things they wanted to pass, some of them dealing with privacy. So I know we're going to get into that. So that really started my journey and inspired me to just dig deep, do a lot of research, writing. I started doing a lot of speaking on the topic.
So people are really unaware, I think, of the amount of data that drones collect. Can you share a little bit about what are some of the examples of data that these big drones collect?
Well, so first of all, I think the big Air Force drones that you're talking about, they're flying over 30,000 feet above ground level. It's going to be probably more similar to like a satellite imagery. Okay. But the more common drone would be the smaller drones, right? The small UAS or small uncrewed aircraft systems that are going to be flown at construction sites or in your neighborhood, maybe over your backyard. And so to answer your question, it doesn't matter whether it's a small or large aircraft. It's all about the sensors, right? So what sensor is being used, and then that will drive what kind of data is being collected. There's everything from LiDAR there's even a company here in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado, called Black Swift Technologies. They've actually created a sensor that measures water, moisture, and soil. So when you think about what kind of data or information can be collected, no pun intended, the sky's the limit. It just depends what sensor you're putting on the actual aircraft.
So I have a follow-up question. If a company or a individual goes and buys a drone, is there then a third-party sensor market that I can go and get sensors and put them on the drone? Or is it something that these sensors come on the drone already equipped?
Well, so there's dumb drones and there's smart drones. The dumb drones are going to be like the really small hobby ones that aren't going to have necessarily a camera on them, right? That's going to be feeding back. An example of a dumb drone, and this is another Colorado company. So, hey, Colorado, US Drone Soccer has these little, there's really a thing, US Drone Soccer. Let that sink in for a second. It's a little drone in an exoskeleton that the kids will fly, but there's no camera on that thing. They're literally flying that thing freehand. Now, the majority of drones are going to have some kind of a camera on it, just so you can see what you're doing, like on your app on your phone or on your ground control station. So generally speaking, the drones are going to have some kind of a camera or sensor that allows you to navigate and see what you're doing. But also you can buy additional sensors. And some of these, like I said, can be super advanced, thermal imagery, things like this. Now, when you're talking about that level of sensors, those are going to be kind of big projects, mostly professional drone pilots doing significant commercial operations.
Thank you for clarifying.
Drone collection, the sky's the limit.
It's going to be the episode.
There you go. There's the quote. I can see it now.
Oh, I think that might get said on Monday. But anyway, we'll have to attribute that to Dawn.
We will.
But anyway, so Dawn, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your thoughts around some of the drone pilot projects, like what Walgreens is doing down in Fort Worth, delivering prescriptions, and what needs to happen for that rollout nationwide. And specifically, what I'm interested in hearing you talk about, if you can, is the issues around what's called beyond visual line of sight.
Okay, well, there's only about 400 plus pages of issues discussed in a relatively newly released report called the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee report. And so a whole host of things have to happen. Number one, technology has to be, I think, perfected. Now, I think a lot of the technologies needed for command and control outside of the pilot's site exist. Things like detect and avoid technologies, whether they're baked into the aircraft or ground-based surveillance systems. That's a very significant technology. I think remote command center type technologies that where you can have a company that control more than one drone at a time, because it's not efficient or effective to have one person flying a drone like over a giant field for, just say, as an example, precision agriculture. So technology is one thing that needs to be, I think, perfected and widely available. And I don't know that that is the case, like as we sit here today. The second thing is obviously regulation. That's why they had the FAA put together the Aviation Rulemaking Committee. There is right now, Part 107 is what governs commercial operations, and that part requires visual line of sight. And so what the FAA has been doing is granting like these exemptions and waivers. It's a rigorous process. It's, again, the exception to the rule. So it's not routinized. In other words, it's not something that everybody's going to be able to do. So regulations, I think, need to be squared away. And then, there's an infrastructure piece of this, and I know we're going to talk about this, a little bit more. But how is this going to work as a practical matter? So the FAA has already said we're not going to use air traffic control. Okay, so they have a concept of operations, and literally that's what it is, a concept of operations called UAS traffic management. And they've worked on this with NASA. Europe's actually doing some of this with their U-Space out there. But the idea is low altitude airspace would be governed by these third-party commercial service providers. So it could be like Verizon, could be T-Mobile, could be pick another company, where that's how the drone pilot is going to be communicating with this third party. And then there's going to be this whole system. None of that exists today. That's kind of significant. And then last but not least, and I try to do three things, but I'm going with four on this one. Public perception. I think for beyond visual line of sight or any kind of operations that are going to be routinely done, especially in neighborhoods, over people, the public has to accept it. Now, something like what you just mentioned, Justin, the idea that Walgreens can be delivering things to people's doorstep, I think the public is kind of on board with that, unless, of course, it flies over your backyard and it's annoying you. But if you're getting the medicine, woohoo, right? So things like drone delivery are positive news stories. But I also feel like we have a very long way to go when it comes to public perception of drone technology. I think, kind of what Jodi alluded to earlier, there's this perception that there's persistent surveillance and, spying happening, not only from the government, but now the kid down the street that has a drone is going to be doing the same thing, right? So I think that is key to turning the tide of public perception and make these operations routine and accepted.
Well, in our backyard a couple months ago, there really was some drone flying over our backyard, and it was, well, what drone is this and why is it flying over my backyard and what is it doing? And I always like in this situation to Google as a third-party company went around and took pictures from the outside, and there's people in those pictures, and they had of their home. No choice. Yes, it's here. No, it's not. They went and took those pictures. But when we think about a drone flying over, well, what kind of picture might it take? And if it's going to be another third party and it's not really a neutral third party, for better or for worse, some of the government agencies are at least considered a neutral zone. If instead we have this third party company, that's not so much a neutral zone, and they might be taking even more pictures because it doesn't seem to be as regulated of what they can and can't do compared to decision, well, it's outside my home, so that seems to be okay to take pictures of whatever we want. As an individual, it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, so peeling that, you said a couple of things that I want to peel back. First of all, I think there is a misperception is the drone taking pictures. It's the pilot, right? There's a human behind this, at least right now. There's not fully autonomous drones flying around, at least right now. So there is a pilot flying, and so what they're focusing on, I think, is something that's part of training. And I know we're going to talk more about best practice and things like this, but that's the first thing. The second thing is I agree with you. I was walking my dog the other day, and there was a drone following me and my husband walking our dog down the street. And I know enough to know that I'm looking around and I'm like, this thing isn't in visual line of sight. They're definitely violating the rule, and why are you tracking me right now? It was creepy and I didn't like it. And again, that comes down to the drone pilot and people doing things correctly or not correctly. And that person was absolutely, not doing something correctly. To your point about these kind of third-party service suppliers for UTM or, on UAS traffic management, the idea is they're not going to be necessarily, they're not going to be flying the drone. It's going to be the pilot. They're going to have to be communicating, right? They're almost like a version of air traffic control, if you will. But there will be a data piece to that. Absolutely, data will be collected by those third parties. And how, just like with your cell phone, how is that all going to work? I mean, I think this is very much a work in progress and to be determined. But definitely for folks like you that are experts in privacy and cybersecurity, this is something that will be job security for you.
I mean, if you think about the cell phone, those companies have all collected that information and used it and sold it and shared it and monetized it.
Yes.
They could do that because it was them. If you have the sort of air traffic control being outsourced to a third party, just as an individual, I am hopeful that there will be some type of regulation. Otherwise, they will prove the pattern that was done previously, where that data will be used and shared and monetized.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be eventually a regulation, but I would also go out on a limb and say history tends to repeat itself. And they're probably going to have, that kind of standard thing that pops up on your screen that nobody reads, that you say, I accept, because you want to be able to actually do what you're trying to do. Even though it just said they're going to be collecting the data and they have the ability to sell it to third parties. I mean, unless Congress steps in and kind of locks that down, I would almost assume that is going to occur. But more to follow. I don't think it will in Europe because of the GDPR, right? The General Data Protection Regulation.
That's right.
But we're a little bit more liberal here in a way when it comes to privacy, individuals' privacy.
It will be very interesting to see.
So, Dawn, now I want to hone in on your legal background and talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape, because as we know, the FAA does not regulate privacy or security. However, I could see the FAA starting to regulate cybersecurity because it goes to safety of the craft and the infrastructure. And I'd love to get your thoughts about, when you attend conferences and when you speak, your thoughts around the regulatory landscape in this country, at least, as it pertains to how it may evolve with privacy and cybersecurity.
Well, so the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC report, right, that Aviation Rulemaking Committee report, definitely addressed cybersecurity. So it's something that for sure for Beyond Visual Line of Sight operations is going to be a component, I think, of whatever final regulation does come out. Cybersecurity for any business, and I don't care what the business is, and I'm preaching to the choir here, of course, is critical. And, what we're seeing now in the drone industry are companies popping up that have specific cybersecurity solutions for drone hardware and drone operations. I'll give you one example. So I know you two know this, but, I have my own podcast, The Dawn of Drones. It's every Wednesday, 9 a.m. Mountain on Drone Life TV on YouTube. And I had a company from Israel called Mobilicom on my podcast in February. And they talked about their 360 cybersecurity solution that kind of sniffs out if looks like there's an incorrect signal or vector coming in. And then it takes, at some point, if needed, it can actually take over control of the aircraft and land it to make it safe and things like this. So what I'm telling you is that cybersecurity absolutely is a concern for the industry. And what we're finding is companies are creating cybersecurity solutions very specific to the industry.
Very interesting.
Indeed.
Where do you want to go next, Mr. Drone Man?
It's a good question. Well, I guess, Dawn, I want to kind of double back a little bit. And you alluded to it earlier about infrastructure. And we talked a little bit about UTM, which is UAS traffic management. And I think it bears a discussion about, if we're not going to use the air traffic control for, the commercial airliners, and we're starting to use cell towers and existing infrastructure, it'll be interesting to me to see how that will work if you have drones. Can't forget autonomous vehicles, and of course cell phones, and you put them all on that network. Because from a cyber perspective, if I'm a threat actor, that's a huge common point of failure. Just love to get your thoughts or share with our audience the other kinds of what I call support infrastructure will have to be developed to really take drones to mass adoption.
Well, look, these enabling technologies you're mentioning are critical. And we saw just with crewed aviation, right? December, January timeframe with the proposed rollout of 5G, and then the FAA throwing down the red card and saying, hey, this is going to interfere with life critical avionics. Okay, nobody thought of that until now. But this is just one example of many. When you think about spectrum, it's a low density, high demand asset. There's a limited amount of spectrum out there. So what are we using? How are we using it? And to your point, even broadband, radio frequency, things like this. Can people hack it, spoof it, all of that? Yeah, and that's exactly why there are companies popping up that are focusing on cybersecurity for all of these things. But there's so many enabling technologies that need to be thought through very carefully to make sure there's coexistence, and that when somebody is using a drone, particularly for beyond visual line of sight, that connection is secure, and you're not going to have lost link, flyaway drones, because it's one thing if you're in the middle of nowhere. Like I was just talking to a gentleman who was a former test and evaluation, test pilot, out at Edwards Air Force Base, right in the middle of the desert. It's another thing if you're, in downtown Colorado Springs, and somehow like you lose connection. Then what? So yes, absolutely, all of these things need to be thought through. And there's companies that, I'll give you one example. Another example. This is another Israeli company. They're very much on the cutting edge of some of these enabling technologies. ParaZero actually created a parachute system that's in the drone that deploys, so that if there is some kind of a mishap and it has to land, or it lands in a manner maybe that wasn't planned, that at least the kinetic force is less, because that parachute, right, lessened the speed of that drone.
If you've ever been to Israel, Dawn, what they do in cybersecurity, because I went on a mission, it's unbelievable.
Well, Oren Elkayam is the CEO of Mobilicom, and that's something he said was, if you want to have a cybersecurity playground to test your technology and see if it works, like Israel is the place to be, because we're constantly getting attacked. Right. So they kind of perfected their technology on the military side and transitioned that to the commercial side.
Yeah, because I know you've probably heard of that company Flytrex, which I believe is Israeli, that they do drone operations. But I want to take the drone operations, because people are usually familiar with the, as you say, the commercial craft or the really nice hobby ones. But let's talk a little bit about at a higher scale, where we're talking about an autonomous quadcopter, because I know outside of Orlando, they're actually building something like a drone port. Maybe you can talk a little bit to our audience what the challenges look like when we talk about actually transporting people in some type of autonomous drone transport.
Yeah, so that's a whole nother level, right? So when you talk about, and what you're talking about primarily there, Justin, are what we call eVTOL, or electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. So companies like Joby Aviation, I think people would have heard of them as one example. They just put out, I'm going to say yesterday, that they're on track to start flying their aircraft in 2024. They just got Part 135 certified as a commercial carrier. So is that going to happen in 2 years? I don't know. That's what they're saying. But, the whole regulatory scheme, the certification scheme for those so when you think about any part of aviation, there's kind of three components, right? It's the aircraft, it's the airman, it's the airspace. And all three need to be addressed. And that's the FAA's purview. When it comes to aircraft, they're just now, the FAA, putting out policies on, how people will be certified. And they're not, unlike Europe, they're not creating their own new regulation for this. They're pulling in all the different parts that already exist for rotorcraft and aircraft, depending if it's fixed wing or rotor wing. And so it's kind of a hodgepodge. And then, the training that goes along with that. Do you train someone as just a normal general aviation pilot, or do they need to be more like a helicopter pilot? And so all of these things are very much on the cutting edge and very much being discussed, like literally as we speak. And then, of course, there's the infrastructure challenge as well.
Maybe it's one of those where it may not happen in 3 years, but you think it'll happen in 10, maybe it happens in 7.
Maybe. I mean, definitely, Asia, there's flights happening there. And Europe has been doing trials called the Gulf of Finland 2.0, where not only are they testing out their U-space or UTM concepts, but they're flying autonomous drones and these larger aircraft as well. And EHang from China is one of those companies that's working with Europe. So, I mean, there's a lot of kind of, let's just call it R&D, research and development, happening out there in this arena. It's a matter of when does this go commercial? When can people actually start making money off of this? And Joby's saying 2024.
So one other thing I wanted to ask, Dawn, because I know you speak often, you go to conferences, I know you actually do CLEs for attorneys. When you're at these conferences, how much content, when it comes to drones, relates specifically to cybersecurity and privacy issues? Or is that something that's more out of sight, out of mind until, like what we talked about with the FAA and the signals, it came to bear at like the last minute?
Yeah. And that was more of a safety issue, not even so much a cybersecurity issue, but I'd say those issues are very much out in the forefront. I actually gave a lecture, a presentation at AUVSI Exponential, in addition to my Law Tech Connect workshop, that was about privacy. And and they asked me for that. That wasn't something I proposed to them, like, hey, you all should be talking about privacy. They said, hey, we want to talk on privacy. Can you do it? So the 3 pillars, I call them, there's like safety, security, and privacy, I think are always being talked about in this industry. I think they're always on the forefront of people's minds.
Well, that makes me happy.
Yes, sir.
Should make you happy too.
Does.
We often see it at the tail end of other technologies. So on something so important, I think it's good to hear that we're there.
I think this industry is different than, say, Dawn, cryptocurrency, because if you lose all your money, that's really bad. But if we don't do things right with drones or autonomous vehicles, they run into things, people get hurt, they have kinetic force. It's something that you can feel, which is why I think it gets looked at differently.
Yeah, I think so too. And when you think about privacy in particular, I think the bigger concern is on the government side and not so much on the private drone pilot side. Because what are they going to do? Or they're going to post, the video of you in your backyard up on YouTube? I don't know. I don't think so. I'd be more concerned about kind of the government using drones, and then for what purpose? Is it being used properly? Are we, minimizing the collection of non-targets? Let's put it that way. Are we, who's getting to see that information, and how long are we retaining it? I mean, those are principles that in the military we call intelligence oversight. And those are principles that President Obama in 2015 codified for the federal government. But I don't know that at the state, local, tribal, territorial levels that there's that kind of level of policy to make sure, that those things are being protected. Have you guys have heard of the just had a recent development in Lakewood Township versus Maxon case?
Michigan?
The Michigan case. There's an example where, you had a township that wasn't real happy with a couple that believed they had a junkyard in their backyard. Instead of just going out and getting an administrative warrant, they hire a drone pilot to basically fly over and take pictures, and then admit it to, fine these people and do civil penalties against them. So the case keeps bubbling, and the Court of Appeals said, violates the Fourth Amendment, should have got a warrant, and made its way up to the Supreme Court of Michigan, who said, nope, kick it back. We want them to address whether or not the exclusionary rule applies to non-criminal cases. So this thing keeps going on, but I mean, why is it different just because it's a drone? A warrant is a warrant is a warrant, probable cause and reasonable expectation of privacy. So it's interesting times.
That is interesting times. So given all this privacy and security conversation, we always like to ask, what is a tip that you might offer to the audience?
Yeah, I think, well, it depends. The lawyer answer is it depends on who the audience is. If it's someone in the drone community, what I would say, or someone with a drone business, I'd say have a privacy policy. Like, in other words, think about privacy before you conduct an operation. What are you doing to minimize the effect, the collection of information on people? Or think, like, if you're filming a construction site, what are you doing to make sure you're not scooping up all kinds of other information or pictures of people? And can you blur those faces out if you happen to, especially if you're giving it to a client? So having a policy, thinking those things through. And by the way, those policies I think should be written by attorneys, because privacy law, is state specific. And I think people get into trouble when they go online and just say, oh, look, I can buy a template for however many dollars. Well, that template may not fully address not only the collection needs, but then also the back end. Like you have states like California and the Consumer Privacy Act that actually can impact a drone business because of the broad nature of that information and where you're putting it, and the idea that you have to notify people and give them the right to dispute it. It's almost like the European regulations. So that's something where I think it would be wise to speak with an attorney.
Very well.
So, Dawn, last question. So when you're not advocating for drones, flying a drone, what do you like to do for fun?
That is so interesting because, the last 2 years, probably like you guys, I've been in kind of my basement, right, with COVID, just started getting out. What do I do for fun? I love to just get outside, walk my dogs, and I love going to the movies. Just saw Maverick, which was phenomenal, by the way. And just, kind of going out with my family, my husband, friends, for dinner and drinks. So that's kind of the scope of my excitement lately. And I've probably scaled back a lot of what I used to do just because of COVID, and now just in the habit of kind of staying closer to home.
There's no right answer. So whatever works. Well, we're so grateful for all that you shared. If people would like to learn more and connect with you, where and how is the best place to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. So my email is dawn@p3techconsulting.com. And you can connect with me all over social media, either as Dawn Zoldi or P3 Tech. I'm very active on LinkedIn, obviously, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and I have my own Patreon, which is a subscription. So you can pretty much find me anywhere. And I would encourage you to follow me if you're interested in drones, advanced air mobility, advanced technology. And like I said, I've got not only the Dawn of Drones podcast, but we're launching 2 new platforms, one on leadership and one on tech news. Full Tilt, Tech Industry Leadership Talks, and Full Crew. So those also have their own handles and website. So you can check that out, kind of primarily under fullcrew.io. So yeah, thank you.
We will make sure to include all those in the show notes. And it's rare, but I'm going to let you, Justin, have the last word.
About to fall off my chair.
I know, but it's one of your happy topics.
I know. Well, Dawn, thank you. It was a pleasure to get to be introduced to you, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Absolutely. And, to the extent you guys have an attorney crowd out there, just tell them I'm telling them now to mark their calendars for, since you love Colorado, you need to come too. Denver, May 7th, 2023, AUVSI, the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International's Exponential. I'm going to be doing another Law Tech Connect workshop there. So hope to have you all there.
That sounds super fun. So thank you so much for sharing.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.